It will be. Ha ha ha. Oh, oh.
Dobrý večer všetkým. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the fifth of our series or lectures in series of Hungarian architecture. I'm very pleased to welcome here today at the evening two founding members of the Office Architecture Uncomfortable Workshop from Budapest. Our two dear guests, which are Szederkényi Lukas, am I right? Sitting there in the front row, and Ghyczy Denes, who will be our lecturer today. So Denes, thank you for coming, and I will not prolong this introduction more, and I'm very curious what you will be talking about. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Is it okay? You can hear me like this? Okay. Thank you very much for inviting us to give this lecture here in Bratislava. And our lecture's title is The Plan, the Workers and the Dinner. And I would like to start the lecture with an analogy from agriculture, taken from our own experiences, because we believe that it makes architecture understand easier if we take examples from other fields too. So we went to South Tyrol, visiting an architect friend, Simon Platter with Lukács, and we helped him to work on the apple fields of his father. We saw the trees being grown in straight rows between cordons, that made us think about how people transform the plants in order to their own comfort. How a tree is made to grow, forming straight walls and corridors. And during the work, we talked a lot about the changing of the old-fashioned gardens here, how the natural round-shaped trees were made to grow straight in lines. Simon told us that the roots were artificially transformed in order to make the work easier and more comfortable for humans. The situation made us think about how architectural spaces were formed to serve human needs and comfort. We also noticed architectural spaces in agriculture, so we went on searching for other analogies with agriculture here. The similarity of the two words, planting and planning, is also made us thinking further. As I put the seeds into the soil, I plant something, then I wait curiously what is going to grow out of it. It is something familiar to the feeling when I draw a plan and wait eagerly for the construction and how the building will look like. Another analogy from agriculture that interests us now is the idea of the architectural compost, which could work as a fertilizer on the field of architecture. The compost can be a symbol for the circulation of nature. We can regard the environment as the soil, the plan as the seed, and the question is, what kind of compost shall we find or make to fertilize the field of architecture? So there is the order and the closure of the plan, and the chaos and unpredictability of the environment, basically all the plan attracts. The architecture can be built from these two. In the plant, there is a tension between order and chaos, between the preconceived and the unpredictable. The chaos has to be made alive. That is why this medium has to be dealt with, not just the plan. And now I would like to show you some single-family houses, what we designed in the last few years. We have had a few works that were among saving an old house, mostly built during socialism, usually as a weekend house near the city. These properties are now in a fancy suburb area with various new family homes. Our customers also wanted to move here, but couldn't afford to build a completely new house. So we decided to keep the original buildings and built additions to them in order to meet the needs of the families. By keeping the original house, not just money was saved, but a lot of building materials and energy too. This example is about how this situation could be solved in Hungary. The owner is a young couple with 2 small children here, and the plot is very narrow, and it's on a steep slope. And the regulations have changed since the old house was built, and now it stays on an illegal place. That means that it can be saved but shall not be altered in any way. The shape of the new part is the result of this given situation, basically. It looks like penetrating the old house from a different angle, like if the 2 houses crashed into each other accidentally. Or better, they look like the houses that John Hajduk sketches, which you can find in the book Architectures in Love. This is one of the sketch of John Hajduk there. And they are making love here. Yes. With this union, new higher quality spaces were made that could not have been made without keeping the original house. For example, how the kitchen and the entrance are connected to the main living space here. The old house that was worth nothing at its original condition, or even was a burden, as it should have been demolished, was used and born again this way. During the university years, we read Chang Chu stories about Taoism, and he teaches the need for the effortless working that we found very interesting and sometimes familiar to our working methods. I would like to show you another house now that is connected to this kind of Taoist approach of planning. I mean, the connection with Tao is the effortless working method, or the effortless plan, as we sometimes like to call it. So this is the other house. This site is at the border of a small town nearby Budapest, and it's regarded as an agricultural area too, which means that we could build a house only using 60 square meters from the plot. And that there are strict regulations also for these elevations too. Being as economical as we could, the form of the house was shaped to follow the site and the terrain that resulted in this V form. The shape of the roof and the concrete retaining wall next to the building were also the result of the regulations, which doesn't mean that they are not able to form an organic whole. So this is the retaining wall. So these 2 examples show this attitude towards our planning methods, as we are trying to accept the circumstances and all the possibilities, like the site, the given materials, the budget, and the needs of the clients. And we try to shape them without total control, letting it to reach a common goal. This means that sometimes the final plan is something that we would never draw to a plain paper, to a blank paper, but it is shaped by real life that is never in a strict order. And at the end, such spaces were made that could never be made only within the architect's mind. Even though this house meet all the strict regulations, we often have confrontations, of course, with the local authorities and main architects. Then we saw a documentary about the writer T.S. Eliot with the title Wasteland. The narrator tells that his poems look like quite ordinary at the first reading, but as we take a closer look, they seem to have been twisted with 75 degrees. Perhaps the same is true to our houses as well. And now I would like to talk more about planning methods that we were thinking about while doing these single-family houses here in Hungary. And we came up with the idea of duality of the architectural plan. This is the Farnsworth house from Mies van der Rohe. I'm going to use it as an example here. So the university teaches you to draw up detailed construction drawings. The designer builds the house in the abstract, step by step, deciding how every part relates to each other, until they have a drawing that means that all that's needed then is the physical force and skill of the builder, leaving out the builder's creativity and freedom of choice. Our experience when planning family houses is that you can't mostly make detailed construction plans, not only because of lack of time and money, but also because the choice of materials and workmen is constantly changing in Hungary. That means that it has only been very rarely the case what we drew on the paper is what actually came to be in reality. In some cases, it's even possible that a house that was designed, for example, with a steel frame, like here, ends up being built in concrete or ends up being built in wood. So that's why we started to think about a new way of planning, at least for us, a new type of architectural drawing to use in this family house planning. So the following questions arose: is the plan devoid of materials, or does it in fact start with the materials themselves? Is the builder who has become the planner, having understood the process of construction, or is it the designer who has become the builder in looking for materials to realize their material-less vision, a vision fueled by the drive to build? Is the architect a professional with a broader scope of vision than his colleagues doing the specialized physical labor? Or are they simply an idealist with a desire to transform the human environment? An idealist looking for people who understand the reality of materials and are able to combine that freely with the architect's existing vision. So the situations we encountered while designing family homes showed that we have to treat plans as completely free of materials, expressing only feelings and meaning, and preserving freedom for the people and materials that will interact with it during the building process. Thus, we picture the plans as a charged polarity that catalyzes the desire to build. The emotional pole of this polarity is the sketch, which determines the character of the entire house and is the first step in the planning process, at least for us. It's unquantified symbol, basically. The polar opposite of the sketch would be a completely dry scale immaterial drawing, showing the measurable sizes and proportions only, ensuring the readability of the scale and location of the building. As Goethe says in one of his writings on polarity, quote, "There can be unity in a higher sense too when the opposites first become intensified, and then from the interaction of these two intensified opposites, a third, new, unexpected something is born, something of a higher order." Quote ends here. And that unexpected something is the finished building for us. Both drawings, so the sketch and this one, are material-less, since the material will be born out of possibilities dependent on the environment in which the building is to be built and on who ends up building it. So the architectural stylistic spirit of the building comes from the charged contrast between the two drawings. And it is this spirit that must infuse the people who will be then part of the process of construction. Building is the situation where the material-less is transformed into material, and therefore it is important that the process remains open to the freedom to make changes. Usually the construction drawing represents a border between the architect and the builder, and it is the point where the architect finishes and the builder begins their work. And we want not to divide this situation, but above all, to unite these two participants during the building process. This method, however, relies on the builder being open to the creative acceptance of the style and form derived from the charge between the poles of the true drawings, maintaining its character. On the other hand, it also needs the designer to have empathy with the people and materials that will ensure the buildings becoming a reality. So we are dealing recently with the architectural plan, the way it is used, the real need for it, and how it connects the architect and the builder. And the question is if it is possible to make a plan, letting it to be more open like this, and giving the freedom for the builders for finishing it. How architects should communicate in a more open way with workmen, what kind of books, catalogs, or planning methods are needed for this. So the education of architects and workmen are totally separated in Hungary. And we believe that learning aesthetics is very important for workers as well, because without good taste, a worker cannot make good decisions on his own. He can just follow, or sometimes what happens that he is ruining the plan. As I have already mentioned, this situation is taken from our own experiences, only from Hungary. By the way, a series of these drawings I am showing here were exhibited in Viper Gallery in Prague last summer with the title Planning and Building Methods. And in collaboration with Viper Gallery, they also published a book with the same title. So this is a sample picture from the book. We are very proud of this book. Yeah. So there is a quote from John Ruskin from the book The Nature of Gothic, which we really like and also relates to this topic well. As 100 years ago, maybe we sensed the situation similarly. The quote goes like this: "We are always in these days endeavoring to separate intellect and manual labor. We want one man to be always thinking and another to be always working, and we call one a gentleman and the other an operative. Whereas the workman ought often to be thinking and the thinker often to be working, and both should be gentlemen in the best sense." And we thought this picture would really fit this quote here. On this collage on the left, you can see the master Gerhard Richter working, and on the right side, the Hungarian master mason working. And I would like to show you now the house, which floor plan I used to demonstrate how we imagine the immaterial plan. This house is called the House of the Sun and the Moon. This house was unfortunately not going to be built, at least not for the original customers, because despite of the great effort they made for this plan, it seems that they won't be able to build it. The house consists of two parts: the cube-shaped space of the living area and the narrower two-storied part with the sleeping spaces and bathrooms. And when the plans were ready, we noticed the contrast between the two wings, and that their characteristics in the form and function is like the sun and the moon. As we were drawing the sketches of this house, we ran into the problem of these sharp angles at the junction of the two parts, which we found rather hostile. We tried to solve this problem with making cornerings into the sun shape that has the function of the entrance, and another into the shape of the moon that became a bench on the outside wall there, as you can see. And now I would like to continue with Richard Nonas, who was a contemporary artist and who inspired us a lot. And he died recently, unfortunately. But we also met him and talked to him personally at his exhibition in Vienna 2 years ago. According to his thoughts, a space consists of and is formed by the objects put in them. The seemingly different objects create a tension that alters the space itself. And these different objects create one whole unity as a space. And we tried to look at objects through this lens when 10 years ago we started our architectural works with small-scale material experiments. And by object design, the process sometimes started with given things, like leftovers or materials that we try to use in different ways than usual. And here is a form created by the characteristics of the material, like the weight of the concrete and the form of these PVC tubes. So we had some switch pipes in our workshop making concrete pillars with. And we also wanted to use these PVC pipes, not just for scaffolding. Then we made this series called the columns. We were trying to pour concrete with different consistencies into these different sized plates, into the different sized tubes. And together they made these different sized plates of the pouring out concrete. And we believe that through object making and learning the materials, we can improve our architecture too. And now I would like to show you a video that we made during installation in GFCK Leipzig in 2018 when we were exhibiting there, just to get a glimpse of our working methods and material experiments. Okay. So, dealing with materials and planning, we realized that every material connects to a worker. If one specializes himself by working with only one material through a lifetime, can it change his own character too, both physically and spiritually? Sometimes if we have an experience like this, like visiting a galvanizing factory, we write down our thoughts in short stories. So we wrote this story about the worker who is losing a teeth every year because of the zinc steam which is all around the building. And this is a common thing among these kind of workers there. So what kind of sacrifice they make by producing shiny things for buildings? And our other question was, do we architects have an empathy for these people when drawing something? We work with the relations in between of workers and their materials and the plan. We are also searching for other aspects of material characters too. So this summer we took part in the Documento 15 exhibition in Kassel, Germany. The Hungarian participants were curated by Off Biennale, and our common concept was building a playground there. A kindergarten teacher told us that children should play around workshops. And that is very important for them when they see the grown-ups work, and that they can use the leftover materials for their play. The material, when it becomes leftover, loses its function. Thus, it gets a kind of freedom that can inspire display. This way, a building site can be a real playground for children. Our installation was the making of Councillor Crespel's house and its building site as a playground. And each object, like construction element of the house, the windows, the skylight, the beeswax on the glass of the skylight, and the wavy drain pipe, and the container for the gravel, all these that we designed and built ourselves as well, has their own characteristics, and these elements together form the unity of the installation for us. This was a gravel curtain, which is a feature of this installation, and we put up a wooden container above the entrance inside, and if you filled this container with gravel and pulled out the copper bar, you could experience this gravel shower for like a minute, which acts as a temporary door element in this installation. And it also brings the sound of construction site into the installation. And in the next project was called Alone with Bees. In this project, Alone with Bees, we explore how the architectural system of the hive has transformed over the ages. We are inclined to regard architecture as the opposite of the natural world. But why is this so, and why do we believe that the honeycomb built by bees are part of nature, while the house built by humans is an entirely different world? The beehive is somewhere in between, as it is a human-built space and accommodated by bees, which simultaneously has a very intense relationship with nature. The bees, and with humans, the beekeepers, while there is also some strong connection between the two. This project was part of the Off Biennale Budapest in 2021, and one could enter and be alone in this house for an hour, letting oneself indulge in the sound and scent of the bees and the nature. And we have been making solitary spaces for years now. For example, this was the Bull House in 2018, which we made with students. And our solitary spaces concentrate on one material, or fragment of nature, which accommodates a special kind of focus. But these spaces are not about complete solitude. In this case, the bees are living like they are part of the building, just like the roof or the windows. As the light shining through the beeswax window connects humans with the outside world in this space, and in the sound and scent of bees that connect us to the surrounding world. Its shape and perforated screen resemble an enlarged beekeeper's musk wheel also. And in this project, the hive, the wooden chair, and the bees themselves are architecture tools, like a pillar or a roof. A journalist wrote as he visited the house with bees that I went to sit in a metal cabin for 60 minutes to watch the bees, and nothing happened to me. And that's exactly what we wanted with this space. For example, when we are walking in nature, it can be beautiful too, but there is always the need to reach a distant place or to get back home. So we always do something for a reason, and besides the meditation of doing nothing, the contact with the precious material is also very important for us. We think that through a material that constructs a building, people are connected who were working with it. This idea leads to another project called the Beeswax Worker, which was exhibited at the Venice Architecture Biennale last year. And this exhibition was made by 12 different architects' offices. Each of us had to rethink a building in Budapest. Our building was a Lutheran church that was built in the 80s of a light steel construction, but today it is too small and uncomfortable for the community. So we imagine the story that the colony of bees finds and takes away the church, which is not needed by human anymore. And they use it for storing their leftover beeswax in it. Then someday a carpenter comes and finds the huge amount of beeswax in the strange building in the middle of the field, and he starts to use it for his work. A few years later, his whole workshop is changed by waxworking, and he is just called now the wax worker, a carpenter turned wax worker. So we created this character and imagined a section of his workshop and his working table with all his tools and chair there in the Venice Biennale. And this is what we exhibited basically together with this whole story. We also use beeswax in different ways. For example, these are beeswax cups we created using the skin of the grapefruit. And our most common feature is to put a portion of beeswax on the top of the screws, making this joint easy to disassemble. And we think that this is our trademark now. So it's becoming our trademark now. And now the work of Árpád Dobribán, who made a big impact on our work too. And he's a Hungarian-German artist who has made art by cooking. And getting to know him, the milieu of his workspace, his kitchen and approach made us think a lot about our own work too, and our own workplace too. And not just because we like to cook and make food performances as well. And here are some photos of our office, which is basically a kitchen full of custom-made furniture and, of course, books and computers. And this is our workshop, how it looks when we are working there. And it was a garage, and we turned it into a workshop. And sometimes if we make an order, it looks like this on the right. And sometimes if you make a mess in the office, it looks like that on the left. And we think that cooking and architecture, food and space has many more parallels. And here I would like to read a short story for you that we wrote about this parallel, we think, about food and space. So the story goes like this. He had just removed the plastic mouth from the wax figure. The sculpture showed a masonry worker clumsily holding a huge hammer. Looking at the figure, he was contemplating how to do the inner and outer sand mold in case he was going to pour bronze to where, at this very moment, there was wax. The masonry figure was made by an old teacher of his for an awarding ceremony of the labor union of bricklayers, and it was up to him to work on the bronze version. As it was standing on the table, he wondered why such a sculpture is still needed. Meanwhile, he was thinking of his study years, a time he dealt intensely with the influences of the bee society on art history. Suddenly, a memory about the bees came to his mind when he was thinking of the sand mold. How fascinating these insects are, and how it's possible that two eggs with the same genome would, depending on the form of its mold, the cell it was put into, and the food it was given, transform into two completely different insects. One would become the queen and the other a worker. Maybe biologists did understand this process, but for him, the fact that the surrounding space and the food would generate a fundamentally other kind of insect seemed like a miracle. As he was looking at the wax sculpture, he thought about how this tiny shell, which would be pressed between the two sand forms, like the egg is pressed between the form of the cell and the food it is eating. As if the progress of its transformation was born out of the tension between the outer space and the inner food. Like it was suffering from these circumstances. He liked this analogy he invented, but didn't want to think it further, because as he would recognize soon, it was just another sentimental idea, easily ruined by overthinking. The story went like this, and I would like to show you an exhibition what we made this spring in Budapest. And in another novel by us, or a short story by us, architect and the chef are sitting at the table. And the story goes that they were chatting over a bowl of steaming soup that the cook had prepared. Sorry. The cook was talking about how he had made the soup, how the water boiling in the pot had turned the neutral base into a tasty dish. And the architect asked about the recipe, saying that he too worked from plans. The chef could not give him the recipe, nor had he ever had one, just a taste that had been developed over the years, a seasoning that evolved and changed as he cooked. The architect wondered, as an architect, should we just create the framework, the pot and the neutral base stock, or should he, like the chef, season his buildings himself? So the Crespel houses, that was the exhibition's title, Crespel's houses. So these Crespel's houses are named after a short story by the Romantic writer E.T.A. Hoffmann. And the houses are cast in wax and mixed with different spices. And they stand on gypsum hills. Together they form a landscape. The mountainous landscape was discovered by the art of Romanticism and made the subject of literature and painting too. And each spice gives the houses a different color, a different scent, a different character, and a different taste. And with this exhibition, we tried to raise some questions, like in architecture, what is the spice? What gives a building its character? The people who inhabit the buildings, or the materials that make up the spaces. And we make all kinds of events in the office and around the office. And one of them is the TOA exhibition. TOA stands for Thoughts on Architecture, which is a project we have been working on for 5 years now. And usually we ask some architects, artists, or just some friends to join us and write down their thoughts on an A4 paper, which is somehow related to architecture. And when we have these 12 issues ready, the 12 A4 papers ready, we make an exhibition out of them. We erect this lightweight, thin structure, and we put the 12 issues on the 12 shelves inside it. And with our TOA events, we would like to connect people and make local culture in real life. The first event was back in 2017, in October. And the fourth one, was in this April, which was the official opening of our Taco workshop as well. Here you can see the opening of the Taco workshop. So this Taco workshop is a mobile kitchen in our office garden. And it has a guest area in our own workshop space. And it's always furnished different ways with the objects that are being made or stored in the workshop. And we have been dealing with the duality of holiday and weekdays, mostly with the question that why the society have to highlight some days in the year. And the most of our common holidays are connected to a natural event or some kind of changing in the year that are mostly forgotten, and only the tradition and the feast remains. So we started to think about if we can also create new feasts and holidays today. This is the Spring Wind House, which was an experimental try for this, where we wanted to celebrate the arrival of the spring wind and the spring itself. With this, we were invited for the Oslo Architectural Triennale back in 2019, where we also made the Nordic wind house together with the Norwegian painter Hanne Borchgrevink. And this way we wanted to bring this tradition abroad. And both of these simple structures, the Hungarian and the Nordic wind house, are connected to a feast, a kind of new tradition, what we would like to keep alive in the future. And we believe that if we are dealing with different things, not just architecture, it makes us more open and thus affects our architectural design positively too. And this final project I'm going to show you is a restaurant, basically. Lukács's brother has a garden in the countryside. which is not far from Budapest. And he's planning to build his own house there, and also he would like to run a pop-up restaurant in this place. So the garden contains of an old wine cellar, which was almost ruined. And we removed the roof, kept the old stone walls, and built a temporary flat roof on the top. And this is going to be the kitchen of the restaurant. The cellar behind it was in very bad condition, so it had to be opened up. And this is going to be the dining space. And the garden behind the cellar is the garden of digestion, where people can walk or sit down after eating. So the restaurant consists of these three places: the kitchen, which you have to go through to reach the dining space, where everybody eats together, and the garden of digestion, where you go after eating and you could be alone sitting in one of these pavilions. And just recently we made another digestion pavilion in this garden together with our friends here. And finally, I would like to show you a video about this building event which took place this summer on the countryside. And this video will have some subtitles, which is an edited extract of the novel by E.T.A. Hoffmann, titled Counselor Crespel. So thank you very much, and I will show you the video as a final act.
Szerintem ennyi elég is.
Igen. Jelöljétek be, hogy hol kell vágnom.
Tutacska, vagy nem tudom, olyan érzésem van, hogy...
Mondjuk azt kézzel szól.
keveréket.
Ez a legjobb feladat.
Hálás.
Csak csirkés volt.
De a Luca jól tapszolt, nem?
Ja, mi az, hogy taps? Az a tapsi, gyágy, tapsi.
That's it, yes, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Denis, very much. I mean, you open so many, how to say, philosophical and very subtle topics that I'm wondering how the discussion will be. Thank you very much for all the thoughts and the inspiration you gave us. I would like to ask perhaps right in the beginning that one more, let's say, question about the origins of the way how you approach dealing with architecture and art, because I mean that you are somehow you are positioned somewhere on the edge between architecture, art, or architecture without architects, even if I can put it like this. So is it a kind of consequence of your education, or just in the contrary, that this is a kind of continuity of your education?
Maybe Lukács can join me answering these questions, because yeah, actually it's
I can.
It's a consequence of our education in a way that we never really seen any workshops, any practical work we didn't really do in university. So we were just planning and then learning, and then we didn't do any material experiments, nothing of this kind. So we really missed doing things in real life. So we were not satisfied with only maquettes and nice designs and renders. We wanted to make real things, and that's how it started. Like with Lukács, we wanted to touch them feel them and see them in live. So that's why we started with small scale material experiments, mostly furniture at the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is something that our students also struggle with, that they are completely like cut off the practice, like workshopping, and we are proud of being a kind of have a kind of Bauhaus tradition, but we do not have it in reality. And perhaps my next question would be that, do you think, I think that this kind of division between the planner and the laborman or the man of the like in a workshop, that it was caused by modernization, that this is a typical product, that you simply lose this kind of direct direction. But in my opinion, it was also somehow influenced by the practice of the socialist, let's say, state-organized companies and project offices, that this was really a kind of not a collaboration, but just the contrary. So, because if you look at the experience of, for example, on Austria, how the architects deal with people on site, they are not really always producing these exact plans. This is very typical for our post-socialist countries, that we need to plan everything because we are simply afraid that the practice, that they will not be able to think on the site and they will spoil everything. So how do you feel about this problem? Perhaps.
It's not an easy question. Because I think when we have a project, like really small scale project, like it's family house, it's really different like a big scale project, of course. I think this is why we also find this idea, because we have a lot of conversation also in the building side, and we realize that we have to find a lot of decision in that situation, because sometimes the workers cannot understand the plan, but also sometimes if we have a conversation with them, we have also some kind of new ideas came. So I think this is why we came up with this idea. And also, of course, it's really like an idealistic thoughts what we said in the lecture, but I think without this idealistic thoughts starting, we cannot rethink or reform our situation in the real life.
And we were talking about, we stopped making 1 to 50 scale drawings, and this is just because what Lukács said, that it's easier to work on site with the workers because they don't really look at these drawings in Hungary. So it's easier if you make a nice collaboration with them on site, then it can maybe a better solution than what you have drawn on paper before. So it can be together with this unity, worker and architect can make maybe better details, better solutions in these houses.
Yeah, and also when we start to build small furniture, small object in the workshop, we sometimes also realize that we are really not a craftsman or like a master, so we have to plan furnitures or details, what we can build or what we can realize. And also we understand that we should focus on how the people easy to realize. So also the plan should like help the workers to build the structure, not against the workers. So it's also really was interesting for us that when we realized this and tried to involve this idea to our architecture too.
And also, if you are thinking while drawing something on how to realize it and who will realize it, and you feel this empathy, we felt this empathy for ourselves because we were doing it. So it drives your hand very differently. So you will make so different decisions in design when you go through in your head how it's going to be made, what's the dramaturgy behind it, and who are the actors who will take part in this whole situation.
And I think our taste is also changed a lot, like in the university is really not normal to plan like the house what we show you, but now for us it's really normal that how it looks like, because it's also a bit not just a bit crazy forms about the strict regulation, but also that the joint and the details, how we just let them, which is the easiest way to build a structure or a roof or something like this. Like a roof ending is really special, it's really simple and not so special.
This could be another question. What do you think about this aesthetical canon and about this fashionable forms, etc.? Because you are not really like dealing with this. At least you've been not presenting it. This could be another question. Is it really your work only that what you have presented, or is there a kind of, backup, like everyday projects that you earn your money with, and this is a crème de la crème that you have shown to us? So, but I don't want to provoke. It's like, this is very, very fragile what you have presented, so this is why I'm asking. But you can answer, and perhaps our audience can prepare their questions, and I will then deliver you the micro.
It's fragile, yeah.
Yeah, I think what we show you, it's also part of our life and also our money life too, we also live from it. But of course, this was the first time when we start an office and we start to build this furniture, and this really simple furniture for our friend first, and our friend firstly. Relatives sometimes too. It was also about this money question, because we cannot live from planning, because we don't have any planning works. But with this realization, we earn, I cannot say a lot of money, but enough money to stand.
Enough money not to be free, actually.
This is very important, because exactly for our students which are in their last year of studies, so it might be a good inspiration that you mustn't end up in a big office earning lots of money, but you can be free with less money.
Yeah, I think because it's also because we are quite good situation, because we have an own family house which we get from our families. Fathers move from the countryside, so we have the space where we can work. So it's this lot of help us to do this, of course. So I cannot say that, you can go and do the same easy, but you should try, or somehow it maybe can work.
And actually I was working for 2 years in architects' offices, so I tried it and I didn't really like it, so then we started our own things together, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Thank you. Questions from your side, dear students?
It's the same in Hungary always.
You can be very frank. I already started with this strategy, so. Oh yes, great, thank you.
At the beginning you said something really interesting, I think. You talked about the material prices that change a lot, and that's why you make plans that can use many different materials according to the one, and then you use the one that's the cheapest. That's what I understood. And I was wondering, when you want to plan sustainable, I can imagine that it's difficult, because when you give away your influence, and then you can't choose the right material. But then I don't know how to say. But I was asking questions: how do you build sustainable in those conditions?
It's also a hard question. I think it's also really interesting, this sustainable materials, because also there are sometimes you cannot use because of the rules, like mud or something like this. It's really hard to connect with the normal, calculate, how can I like the material? Hát, hogy nem kiszámítható.
You cannot calculate with it precisely. So you are talking about the rules of for
the material.
Okay. Yeah, sustainability is. We know that's in the focus of every architect nowadays, and it's a very big topic that you have to consider while designing and doing this profession. But we really don't think about in these terms. So we think everything can be sustainable if you use the right amount of it, maybe.
But actually, I mean, your strategy to be very like buttoned down and doing things like with very basic craft and everything. So I mean, it's much more sustainable than using all these very sophisticated systems, because actually you deal with what is like the most easier way, most natural way, if I can put it like this. So I don't know what is actually yeah, it's very difficult to talk about sustainability because you can have different perspectives viewing it. So I mean,
you mean that we don't use these building systems as they are sold on the market? We try to focus on this, trying to find basic materials and put them together in our own systems, right? But
at least I understood it in that way. Perhaps I'm wrong, I don't know.
Sustainability.
Some easy questions for our dear guests. Cornelius, do you have a question? Okay.
I hope these questions will be a bit easier. The first one is, how would you describe or how would you define spicing your building? Is it only the people involved in the creation of it, or is it the occupants, or what else would you say contributes to the flavor of a building? And then just the second question to that is, in your exhibition that you showed, how do you relate the spice buildings with the gypsum plaster pedestals that they were seated on?
I think we are in the cage now because we said something, but we also don't have an answer for this.
We really like to raise some questions, what we sense around us, and we use these materials to show these questions, for example, in this exhibition. And in this specific exhibition, we also like put together the Romanticism and these thoughts about spicing architecture or spicing spaces. So that's how they are related. They are like patchwork of ideas, patchwork of thoughts and questions put together in one scene. So that was the scene I showed you. And there are lots of aspects. So one aspect was the Romanticism, which is connecting to Crespel, Chancellor Crespel and E.T.A. Hoffman, which is connected to our approach of building without plans. So there are lots of things connected, and we don't really know why we connected these things together. We just like to ask these questions.
This is perhaps good answer, because as I already put it, that you are moving somehow on the edge between art and let's say architectural planning. So you are allowed to do it only intuitive, like don't have an exact rational explanation for this.
Yeah, but also like this question, it's also we have an answer how we realize the project. But this first question that if you are an architect, you plan something like a frame, a proportion, or the size. This is the main goal of architecture, or also you have to and you just let it that for the users to feel it with like flavors and also like spices, or no, you also as an architect you make a fix dishes for whole days for the users. It's really interesting for us, like just a picture, and we really don't know the answer because finalize if you have to fix the plan or you build a house, you use materials which also have some flavors or some spices. So this is the connection of when you say something in the university, you let the people to use it, and it's like really neutral the space, but can we make neutral spaces? This is the main question for us.
Because there are some architects who say that they are only making containers for use, containers for livelihood, and containers for people to use it. So this was the starting point. Like,
but of course the form is also part of this spices, that the cube form is not the same like a round form. So there are a lot of questions. It came from this idea, I think, but we really don't have like fixed answer that we should use like that way or this form or this material.
And we don't really know how far we went in this. So we are doing the dish or we are doing just the framework. So we don't really know how far we went on this or how far anybody could go on this scale, or is it a scale, or so it's just an idea.
Talking about cooking and seasoning the architecture, what about smell? Is it important for you when you choose your materials and when you deal with space and etc.? Because this is also a kind of interesting topic. Smell of the materials, I mean.
Yeah, of course, it's really important, I think. It was really in the beginning when we started to build this really simple pine wood furniture for a friend of us, and one girl really wanted that we have to paint it to white, but we always push, no, we don't want to paint it because we don't like to use this paint,
this material
to cover the really nice and like the smell of the surface. And I don't know, maybe in English I cannot say, because in Hungary we have two different words for the smell. The bad smell we call like szag, and the good smell we call like illat. And we told them that before we painted this shelf to you, it has an illat, and now it has a szag because it changed. So I think it's really important for us also, this smell and the space, it smells.
And Lukács also made a table like 5-6 years ago where we used beeswax, and we poured beeswax on the top of the glass, and he made these holes all around the table. So if you put your nose there, you could smell the beeswax under the table, because it was a glass and then the beeswax was under it.
It was also in the movie what we showed.
Yes, it was another version of that table.
Film.
Yeah.
We have one question from our online visitor, how we call it.
Just a quick question. It was about, you mentioned the project about the spring wind. How do you keep that tradition alive? And so could you just elaborate on that project about the spring wind, about that little pavilion that you, like a workshop that you just elaborated on?
Every spring we erect this structure. I think this year will be, or next year will be the 10th. Yeah. So every spring wind we just go together with the friends, top of the hill, and erect this structure and have some beers and after move back.
So it just stands for like 20 minutes or maximum an hour. And this became our tradition now, and it looks very good. It's a very nice feeling up there. It's always the same spot.
It was also a question in an interview with us that so can we afford for others to make the same tradition of make like a Hungarian spring wind house event in everywhere in the countries? And we said of course, because it's all about that everybody can build an own, like this really simple basic structure with this textile. So it will be maybe nice that it became like a tradition that way, not just own tradition.
And we also gave this version of the wind house, which was a Nordic wind house, we gave it to the painter lady. So it's actually it's her garden, and she's erecting it every year since then. So maybe we could spread this.
But it was also when they invite us to Oslo to make this, of course they invite the spring wind house, but it was in autumn, and we said that we cannot bring the spring wind house in autumn to Oslo, so this is why we planned this Nordic wind house there, and because we have to change it, because if we do the same, it's not, we kill the tradition or like this structure.
Thank you. There are some more questions. How can I...
Hello.
Hello.
I find it very nice and interesting that you work a lot with like literature, and, like with essays, with stories that you invent or that were written by some other people. And I just think that I'm wondering if the story is something that comes first in the designing process, or if it like come and then you like sort of like follow the story when you are like building something, or if it comes in the end to make it more comprehensible for other people, like to kind of like explain what you've done with the story.
So how the stories are connected to projects?
Yeah, and like which phase of the project they enter.
I think you said 3 examples, and we have all of them sometimes, but it's always different. But yeah, sometimes we have just a story when we finalize the project, and we find some really nice story which have a connection with the idea or the main idea of the project. But sometimes also we find the stories which we really try to continue as a project. So it's no one-way answer for this.
And also I showed you these thoughts on architecture events we make when we ask people to write on architecture on this A4 paper. So we started, actually I started writing because of these kind of stories. So we forced ourselves to write too, because it's another medium that can also help to develop ideas and tell the ideas in a different way, because architects are telling ideas always in concepts, and very rigid, very thoughtful, very philosophical, and we were searching for another method maybe to tell our projects or to tell our way we work, maybe, who knows.
Thank you. I mean, this was very inspirative. I hope also for our students that inventing narratives and learn how to make interesting stories that could accompany your work is very important for an architect. Not as a marketing tool, but to make the thinking more complex, let's say. Okay, some other questions from the side of the audience. If not, I can see no raised hands, so I guess we are done then with the discussion. I would like to thank you once again very much, because this was really very inspirative, at least for me. And looking at you and at the way how you present your architectural work, one would say that the job of an architect is a really relaxed one. So I like this very, very much, and I mean this is something, because we always have this very stressed architects here, and you are just like the opposite of it. So thank you very much for showing us also this kind of.
Like this.
Okay, so you pretended in a very nice way. So Lukas and Denes, thank you very much for coming and delivering your lecture.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. They were very good questions. They were better questions than the last time we did a lecture in Oslo